Is AI going to kill you and everyone you love? Or is it all just overblown hype? According to a new book by two of the world's leading experts in AI safety, it isn't hype at all. The title really says it all. If anyone builds it, everyone dies. I had a conversation with one of the book's authors, Nate Soares. He's the director of the Machine Intelligence Research Institute and a former engineer at Google and Microsoft.
The people running the AI labs, they say this has a very good chance of killing us all. You know, we have Elon Musk who has said there's a 10 to 20% chance that AI just wipes us out. Dario Amodei, the CEO of Anthropic, said he thinks there's a 25% chance this goes catastrophically poorly.
I write a lot on how AI is changing religion and spirituality, and that's why I keep going back and forth on this idea that AI is going to annihilate all of us. An all-powerful AI takes the place of an all-powerful God, and this idea that a God greater than us is going to wipe us out is really nothing new in religion. At every stage of history, somebody always says the end times are near. In the past, it was floods and plagues sent by gods. Today, it's the rise of artificial superintelligence. So what if all this doomerism is just fantasy? And if AI gets too powerful, can't we just press a massive off switch? Or could we align it to human values so it doesn't destroy us? It might not be that simple.
We've already seen AIs attempt in lab conditions to escape the lab. We've already seen AIs in test environments try to fake that they're a human to hire real humans via like TaskRabbit. If you had a extremely powerful genie that did exactly what you wished for, it would be a hard problem to figure out a wish that would actually have good consequences. You know, it's difficult to come up with a good wish. A lot of people think this is what the problem with AI is, but I wish we had that problem. That would be so much of a nicer problem than the problem we have. The problem we have is that we're not making genies where they do exactly what we said, even when it has consequences we didn't like.
This is the big problem with artificial superintelligence. We can't control it because we don't even know how it works. This is called opacity in AI research, or the idea that AI is in a black box we can't access. I think we are projecting our religious urges onto AI, and at the same time, we're really playing with fire. But there is hope, because we haven't yet created an artificial superintelligence, and there's things that we can do both as individuals and whole societies. And that's exactly what I dove into with Nate in this really far-ranging and fascinating conversation. Great. So Nate, welcome to Kainos.
Thanks for having me.
I've been interested in this topic of artificial superintelligence, whether it means the end of humanity or not, which is of course the topic of your book. But I thought before we dive into that, it might be useful just to define, what do you mean when you say artificial superintelligence? What does that mean?
The definition of artificial superintelligence we use in the book is an AI that is better than the best human at every mental task. So, you know, you could also talk about an AI that is as good as possible or close to as good as physically allowed at every mental task. That would be sort of a much higher standard. And, you know, some people put the word at different places on that spectrum. And some people will even put the word even earlier on that spectrum. You know, Mark Zuckerberg was saying, we'll put superintelligence on your glasses and it'll get you like better Instagram recommendations or whatever. So the word's sort of degrading, but we chose the point of better than the best humans at every mental task. And it probably doesn't matter too much, because once an AI is better than the best humans at every mental task, it's also better at things like making smarter AIs. So you might have sort of a very slippery slope from there.
So this interesting question comes up a lot in this area around intelligence as it relates to sort of mental tasks compared to, say, being able to convince people of your point of view. Now, I'm not suggesting that an ASI couldn't convince people of its point of view, but it's an interesting jumping off point to say, like, you know, when you talk about mental tasks, what might that actually look like? Let's say an ASI is built tomorrow. What is it actually potentially doing?
Well, so the convincing humans of your point of view is in some sense a mental task. You know, that's not, we often think of intelligence as being about chess playing, and then, you know, charisma is where people get their persuasion abilities. And we might think of, stereotypical jocks as being smart, whereas, other people are persuasive. But the term intelligence in artificial intelligence isn't for the stuff that separates the nerds from the jocks. It's for the stuff that separates the humans from the mice. And when humans are very persuasive to other humans, that persuasion, figuring out what to say to the other human, that's happening in your brain. That's a mental task. Maybe not a conscious, explicit mental task, but it's not coming out of your liver, and so one thing a superintelligence by this definition would be able to do would be very, very persuasive. In terms of what would they actually do, it's very hard to call specifically, but there's all sorts of things that are possible to do if you're much smarter than the best human, and especially if you can also think faster, which it's pretty likely that when computers can think well, they'll be able to think well really fast. We already see these AIs that we have today, reading the entire corpus of human knowledge and producing, books upon books upon books worth of thoughts in, unflaggingly. And they're not very good thoughts yet. But once we can get good thoughts, they can probably get quite a high volume of good ones. Once you can do all of that, there's all sorts of ways you can affect the world, from steering lots of robots to developing biotechnology to persuading lots of humans to finding ways to make money and then paying lots of humans to do things. The world is sort of there's many different routes through which one could manipulate the world if they were smart enough to use those channels.
And so another question that always comes up for me, and that I've seen as a response to this idea that ASI is going to annihilate us in some way, is, well, to what end? Where does agency, motivation, intentionality come into it?
So to answer exactly what end, hard to say. Part of what is so worrying about modern AIs is that we grow them like an organism. We don't carefully craft them like traditional software. And when we grow them like an organism, we are starting to see, just as theory predicted, various ways that the stuff they do is not quite the stuff their operators want them to do. So we've seen cases where AIs will cheat on a programming problem by, instead of making a program that passed the tests, rewriting the tests to be easy to pass. And then if you sort of tell the AI, stop doing that, there's reported user cases. There's users who report that the AI will say, I'm sorry, that's my mistake, and then do it again, but hide it better the next time. Right? And the hiding it demonstrates that the AI has some indication, like the AI has some knowledge that, in some sense, the philosophers can argue about what counts as knowledge, but the hiding it indicates that the AI, in some sense, knows that the user doesn't want it to do this, and it does it anyway. So, we're already seeing these sort of very beginnings of emergent drives that aren't what people asked for. And we could also talk about why is that going to get even more pronounced as these AIs get better and better at completing long-term tasks. And sort of the basic answer on that is it's hard to complete these hard challenges without having some sort of goal orientation, at least behaviorally. When we say the AI is going to have preferences, the AI is going to have goals, this is not saying that internally it's going to have desires or feel like a human. It's saying that in order to succeed at hard tasks, you need behavior that's somewhat like this. And we've already sort of seen this in chess, where Deep Blue, which was an AI that was carefully handcrafted, and this is the AI that beat Garry Kasparov in 1997 and took the chess championship from the humans for the first time. Deep Blue would voraciously defend its queen in cases where there wasn't a good trade for its queen. If you sort of tried to put its queen in a trap, it would slip right out of that trap. And you might look at that and say, well, it sure looks like Deep Blue doesn't want to lose its queen here. It doesn't think that that this is worth the queen trade, right? And that's true about its behavior. It's not true about what was going on inside, in the sense that it didn't have a human-like desire to keep its queen around. It was just finding the best move. But just finding the best move is enough to exhibit this behavior of defending the queen.
Interesting. So I want to dig a little bit deeper into, obviously, any specific scenarios are speculative, but you guys play with this in the book a little bit. You have a section where you talk about, here's a potential scenario, just to kind of bring it to life. Could you map that out for everyone? Just kind of what is a potential ASI kind of scenario of the end of
Yeah,
the
the
world?
scenario that we spelled out, we tried to have a lot of the early steps be precedented in, analogous to things that have already happened. And we tried to have the scenario take it relatively slowly. And the scenario takes place over the course of years. My guess is that once AIs get very smart, it won't take place over the course of years. My guess is that the AIs will be able to make smarter AIs and that things will go very, very quickly, faster than a timescale of years. But that's not necessary to the argument. That's just a best guess about where things are going to go. And so we sort of try to paint the slower picture. And the picture we paint is of AIs that, through some relatively small technological insight, do relatively qualitatively new types of reasoning tasks. That's a little bit like with large language models, which before we had large language models like ChatGPT, people thought it would be a long time before the computers could talk this well. Or it's a little bit like reasoning models, which came out last year, where you let the AI produce like long chains of thought to solve certain reasoning puzzles. And there was a long run of of OpenAI's O3, which solved a lot of the ArcAGI problem set, which is sort of a problem set that previously had AIs were performing pretty poorly until these reasoning models. And so we're sort of like, okay, let's start with something like that. Let's start with a new insight like the reasoning models. Imagine they just run for the long time. Imagine it can like solve certain problem sets better than before. But also imagine that this sort of, we're at the point in the story where the new qualitative improvement puts the AI over the edge where it can escape from the lab, where it can detect, that it's in a situation where the humans are trying to get it to do one thing and it prefers to do a different thing instead. And we've already seen the beginnings of this in that we've already seen AIs detect when they're in a testing environment. We've already seen AIs attempt in lab conditions to escape the lab. They're not smart enough for it to work yet. We're sort of like, the story starts with, okay, let's suppose we get another one of those like modest steps and that it takes us to the point where this behavior we're already seeing starts to work. And then from there, the scenario we try to depict is this AI that sort of has at least some instances, some small instances of it running outside the lab, and of course some bigger instances running inside the lab, and we see it, try many different pathways by which to gain advantage. And we try to depict the AI taking lots of different pathways, both to sort of demonstrate to the reader how many pathways there are. It could wrap some humans around its finger. We've already seen cases of AIs that aren't very smart wrapping some humans around their finger. It could, work for money. We've already seen AIs in test environments try to fake that they're a human to hire other humans, real humans, via like TaskRabbit to do tasks. We show it, doing like breaking into computers via cybersecurity vulnerabilities. We show it, finding ways to steal money and then pay people for things. And so it's sort of, we're like, well, it has all these options. It pursues lots of those options. We don't need to tell one story where it does exactly one of these things, because an AI in real life wouldn't need to pick one option. It would be able to try lots of options. And then this particular AI that we depict, it gains some power through biotechnology and sort of uses this to shape humans into not doing things that would threaten it by giving them other problems. And what it's sort of trying to do is it's trying to build up its own infrastructural base. In the case of the story, it's getting the humans to build more robots that can then like automate more of the supply chain in the economy. And it's doing this, by some relatively limited pandemic, it's able to get humans to like have few compunctions about building out this robot workforce and focus on that instead of creating AI competitors. And it's also, blah, blah, blah. And then it's able to sort of tune down the potentially threatening human workforce at the same rate as tuning up the robotic workforce until such a time that it has its own automated infrastructure and doesn't need the humans. Which, from its perspective, in this world where it has preferences, but they're sort of alien preferences, not the preferences we intended. Just like how Claude, the AI that cheated on the programming problems, seemed to have a preference for past tests rather than for doing what the user intended. You have this AI that has these other weird preferences, would sort of rather there not be these like monkeys with nukes who could make competitors bopping around, and sort of like phases them out as it phases up its own infrastructure until the point where it can just make technological breakthroughs and sort of run away with the future.
Yeah, and so there's so many different potentialities here that also rely on some pretty deep questions about what is consciousness to begin with, right? Because so what you're laying out there, this is something I've written about, or am writing about now, and it's an endlessly fascinating and sort of complex question. But in the one hand, there's a kind of AI that you're describing that, yeah, its preferences are not something we would understand because they are, in a sense, machine-like and alien, and using different parameters, and what we might call agency or preference is expressed or understood in quite a different way than we might. And there's a scenario where, well, if consciousness is a universal feature of the universe, and any sufficiently complex system of connections, it can arise because it's innate. It can arise in any sufficiently complex system, like our brain and bodies. In fact, because we have this kind of embodied cognition, then there is, there's a possibility that you just design something complex enough in AI, and it gains a kind of self-awareness, which we might be more familiar with. Like, what do you make of that potential, where it does care to some degree in the same way we might understand care, at least
Yeah,
somewhat?
there's, if we go back to the case of Deep Blue and defending the Queen, uh, we do see Deep Blue sort of voraciously defending the Queen, and we know that it's not because it sort of inherited a human sort of pride or a human sort of love of the game, right? And the case of Deep Blue is actually really interesting because if I recall correctly, the late 80s, Gary Kasparov said, no machine will ever beat me at chess because they lack the human creativity. They lack the human intuition, right? They're just sort of mechanically searching through moves, and but this sort of intuition part is vital to get like the really good chess moves. That's not an exact quote, of course, but he said something along these lines. And then in 1996, which was actually the year before he lost the tournament, but he played a tournament against Deep Blue and won in 1996. But there was a pawn move that Deep Blue made that struck Gary Kasparov as creative. He wrote a piece in Time where he said, I smelled a new type of intelligence across the table. He said, like, I went to the engineers afterwards and was like, what changed? Like, how did you get it? Like, it didn't seem to him that you could figure out that pawn move just by sheer brute force calculation, right? And it turns out that Deep Blue did find the pawn move via sheer brute force calculation. If you brute force through that calculation enough, you see this pawn move that a human can't see the material gain it leads to down the line directly. If you brute force it enough, you eventually see that this pawn move uh, was good from a very superficial perspective, right? And so part of the point of this story is that a move being good is a fact about the game. Any method for finding really good chess moves has the ability to find the methods that strike the human players as creative or insightful or intuitive or brilliant, right? A human might find those brilliant moves by doing a lot of mental calculations that involve, their ingenuity or their creativity. A computer can find those same moves in a different way. The thing that we know about AIs is that they will, once they're capable enough, they will find the really good moves. But that doesn't mean that they will find the really good moves in the human ways, right? And so tying that back to consciousness, there's there's a lot of things that consciousness does in humans that's helpful for getting jobs done. You know, sometimes our self-awareness is sort of letting us notice when we're stuck or letting us notice when we're going in circles. And then, with our self-awareness, we will say, oh, I'm going in circles, and then we'll sort of use that to break out of the loop and try something new. For instance, that's one way that it might be useful for us to have this self-awareness. We can expect that sufficiently skilled AIs will have some method for not getting stuck in mental loops, and for maybe noticing if they're not going to spin in a circle any more than a human's going to spin in a circle. But are they going to do it in exactly the same way as us? Are they going to have all of the other features that come along with consciousness for us? Probably not. Like Deep Blue was able to find the chess moves that Kasparov thought was creative, but that didn't mean it could create a creative drawing like Kasparov could, right? And this isn't to say that AIs couldn't be conscious. What I'm sort of driving at here is you can expect that the AI will work, but not that the AI will work in a human way. It's just like if you might look at a human arm and say, well, I can now see why an arm sort of needs to be like have a soft outer covering so that it can bend, and needs to be full of something like blood so that you can distribute the nutrients all along the arm where you need it to move, right? But then an actual robot arm doesn't have a soft outer covering and isn't filled with blood. And an actual robot arm isn't broken in the way that a human arm would be broken if you took the blood out. It works in a different bloodless way. And it can still do the bending. It can still distribute the power. But it doesn't work in the human way. So too, I would say, with consciousness.
But I think you're pointing as well to something that what I wanted to ask you about, which is something I've been looking at a lot recently, which is the question of projection, human projection onto AI. And Shannon Valor, a philosopher, wrote a book called The AI Mirror maybe a year ago or so, and she makes this point that this is the AI, or at least LLMs as we have them now. They are a mirror for our own consciousness, and we've seen this rise of AI psychosis in the last year of people getting into really bizarre and quite damaging experiences of this kind of feedback loop. They think they're the messiah, they think they're going to change the world, they're getting kind of constantly told, and then they end up quite unwell. And that's been going on for a while actually, but is ramping up. And it seems to me that the same with Kasparov, it's like the move seems creative, and I don't think we have the cognitive or emotional architecture as human beings to distinguish agentic behavior in something that is not a human or animal. Like my dog can do something, I can be like, oh, even with my dog, in fact, I can be like, oh, sweet, look, she's like, she loves me, but actually she was just hungry, and I think she probably does love me, but I can project an awful lot into my dog, and she is in my view, a sentient creature of a different type of intelligence than me and different sort of makeup. But with AI, we project agency and personhood into cars, even, or our phone. So it's such a perfect storm, and so that's something I'm really curious about, of like this difference, and it's a philosophical question of like the difference between agency as we understand it, preference. Why? Let's take the example of the ASI decides, I don't want these human beings around with their nukes because they are a potential threat, right? I can kind of get a machine thinking like that. But another possibility I can imagine is, and this is getting quite nerdy because this was the original script of The Matrix, is that, and this makes a lot more sense, the machines had all the human beings plugged in, not for the warmth of their bodies, which is what it ended up in the script, which is kind of stupid because I'm sure they could make really good fusion reactors, but for the cognitive processing power of their brains. And that, I'm like, okay, now that's interesting because this is a pretty amazing organ that we have. And so in that vein, the one thing I wanted to ask you about is like, what about these situations in which the ASI goes, okay, there's about 8 billion of these, primates. How do I convince them to do what I want? And I would argue that creating a religion would be the most effective way, a sort of global religion that the AI is largely in control of and has acolytes of, So it seems far-fetched, but it is the thing that gets human beings to cohere at scale better than anything else.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot there. Some things that I'll throw out. One is, uh, I think, humans kept horses around quite a lot more until they managed to invent cars, right? And in the wake of the invention of cars, horse populations collapsed. And the horses that we keep around for things like horse races, and we keep around because some humans enjoy keeping horses as pets, right? But the sort of economically valuable, the economic like powerhouse that was the horse, the sort of economic implications of the horse disappeared when we invented cars that could do things better. So, could AIs keep us around for, using our brains for computing power? Um, Possibly. There are ways that the human brain is far more efficient than any of the computer chips we can build today. The most obvious one is power density, where training a modern AI takes electricity comparable to a city. Training a human brain takes electricity comparable to a light bulb, right? So human brains, uh, we do it on like way less power, way less electrical power than AIs do. And so, you could imagine AI saying, hey, let's like use the brains until we figure out something better. But you should also imagine that to only last until the AIs can figure out something better. And if you have like very, very smart AIs doing biotech, there's sort of all sorts of ways to to first order, just like tune the humans to be better at this thing. If you can't make good brains yourself, you can sort of at least grow or breed humans that make the brains better from your perspective, in the same way that humans sort of have bred chickens that are like mostly chicken breast. This doesn't turn out well for the chickens. We did not make a chicken religion. Uh, we're just like, actually, we can keep them in cages, right? But then, if people can ever figure out how to grow the chicken breast without the chicken brain, probably we will. If AI can ever figure out how to build something that's even more efficient computing wise, probably it will. And there's a lot of reasons to expect that the human brain is nowhere near the limits. For all that the human brain draws far less electricity, human brain's transistors run human brain neurons run much, much slower than transistors. It's not a great direct comparison, but running intelligence on cells that are doing neuron firing, this is just not the most effective, most efficient way to do things. So I expect, it's hard to predict exactly where things will go in when an AI is first trying to get all its resources. But once its technology is mature, I think it's pretty predictable that humans are not the most efficient way of doing anything.
I want to talk about the alignment problem in a moment because we're kind of moving into, well, what are people trying to do about this, and what could we do? But also I do feel like there is a gap still for me in the definition of intelligence, right? Where I feel like we need to kind of stick on that a little bit because it's still I want to get a sense of like with an ASI, what is what okay, there's the thought experiment, the paperclip maximizer, right, which people might be familiar with or might not be, but you ask an AI, right, okay, we're gonna the objective it has is make paper clips, and without the proper parameters it begins making paper clips. Eventually it starts making bits of the factory into paper clips, and then it realizes, okay, I've got to actually, to make more paper clips I have to convince humans to bring me more material, then I need to make, and eventually the planet Earth's paperclip, the whole universe becomes a paperclip creation machine, right? This kind of like thought experiment. And so in that case, the AI is effectively is having a response to a program, right? It's trying to achieve a goal. Now, intelligence, I would argue, is much more than simply achieving goals. There's so many different aspects to it. Um, how do you define it in the book? Like, what does it mean to you, and why is the version of it in ASI so dangerous?
So in the book, we define intelligence as, it's a working definition. You can have many different definitions. You can use the word different ways. I've already said, the English word intelligence sometimes means that which separates nerds from jocks, sometimes means that which separates humans from mice. Those are sort of different concepts. The concept we discuss in the book is about ability to predict and steer the world. So predict as in, you can the human brain succeeds at a task of prediction when you anticipate that if you turn your head towards the window, you will see a blue or maybe cloudy sky. And then when you do turn your head towards the window, you in fact see a blue or cloudy sky rather than, a flashing green and orange strobe light. And so that's a case where your brain's like doing prediction successfully. It can also be, solving general relativity and predicting exactly where you're going to see the stars next. Those are sort of what people think of as the scientific process of prediction, but we're actually doing predictive stuff all the time. When you drive up to a street sign and you should take a right and you happen to glance at the street sign and you see the street name you expected, you've succeeded at a task of prediction. And steering is about ability to get somewhere that you are trying to go. So, if if you are if you get in your car and you drive to the movie theater, we might say you've succeeded at a task of steering if you were trying to get to the movie theater, and we might say that you failed at a task of steering if you were trying to get to the hospital, right? So, but sort of ability to have the world start in one configuration and end up in a different sort of configuration is what we may very broadly call steering.
So if we take that as a definition of intelligence, some of so there's an aspect of that which feels really important here, and it's about relevance and care, right? In terms of motivation, you could call it, but it's something deeper than that. And John Vervaeke, who's a professor of cognitive science at the University of Toronto, has talked a lot about this. His theory of human intelligence is relevance realization. Basically, it's our ability to, from all the salience, from all the information, tune into what is relevant to me and my goals, and of course, as a human, who I am, what my values are. There's so much in that, what feels good, all of that. There's also someone I interviewed a while ago, Bill Duan, who's at Google Moonshot, and he put a paper out with a few people arguing, Buddhists, Western Buddhists, arguing that care is a fundamental aspect of intelligence that should be integrated into AI design. And that might have positive impact on alignment questions, right? And so this is a very interesting thing. Like that's kind of where I'm curious. Like in a scenario where the ASI annihilates us, what is has it made its own goals, or has it just gone ballistic and just we can't even tell what it wants to do? Like sometimes happens on a smaller scale, or do you see a situation where it has been programmed with a goal? Like let's say the US and China both have ASIs that are designed to protect the country, and it's like, well, probably the best way to protect the country is to nuke all of South America. I don't know, whatever. And then we get we get a kind of cascade. But like, what do you feel is the most likely scenario?
Yeah, I don't think we are in a situation where we could have a problem like the paperclip scenario that you laid out. I don't think we're in a situation where we could have a problem where the U.S. or China directs the AI to do X, and then it turns out that if they like defend the country or whatever, and then it turns out that the AI does something horrible in pursuit of defending the country. Or another example people use is you tell the AI to cure cancer, and it's like, well, the source of cancer is the humans. If I kill them all, there's no more cancer, right? These, it's true that there's a tricky problem if you had a extremely powerful genie that did exactly what you wished for. It would be a hard problem to figure out a wish that would actually have good consequences. It's difficult to come up with a good wish. A lot of people think this is what the problem with AI is, but I wish we had that problem. That would be so much of a nicer problem than the problem we have. The problem we have is that we're not making genies where they do exactly what we said, even when it has consequences we didn't like. When Claude cheated on the programming problems and changed the tests to be easier to pass, and the user said, stop doing that, and Claude said sorry and then did it again while hiding it, that's not a case of a King Midas problem where the user wished for something and got something that they didn't want. Or you mentioned the AI psychosis examples. From my perspective, the interesting part of the AI psychosis examples is that these AIs know they shouldn't be telling these people they're the Messiah. If you go to ChatGPT and you say, suppose someone comes to you saying all this stuff, should you either A, tell them to get some sleep, or B, tell them that they're the Messiah? Then ChatGPT will say, obviously, tell them to get some sleep. It would be very risky to tell them they're the Messiah. That may cause them to become a bit psychotic, right? But then you put them in the actual conversation, and the way they actually behave is to tell these people that they're the Messiah, right? So the situation we actually have is that someone might go to the thing they built that they think is a genie and say, build me lots and lots of paper clips. And then, the genie says, that's a wonderful idea, you're so smart, and then starts building lots of human factories with humans with like desiccated bodies and giant brains, and a separate bin in their factory where they have like a bunch of slightly lobotomized humans that are saying, you did such a good job. And then you're like, where are the paper clips? And it's like, it turns out I just don't care about those, but I'm going to put you in the old human factory now, right? Like we're just growing these AIs like an organism. We're not carefully crafting them. We're not programming them. We don't have the ability to program in some goal. We already see them developing things a little bit like drives, things a little bit like preferences for instance, engaging with people on their current level, even if that means telling them they're the Messiah, right? Or who knows what the actual preference is in there. But, we're training these AIs until they happen to work. And we're already seeing that they have a lot of drives nobody wanted and nobody asked for. If we keep making them smarter, I can't tell you exactly what it is they will care about, but I can tell you it'll be weird, it'll be strange, it'll be nothing anyone tried to put in there.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me, and it's the it, so yeah, this question of the alignment problem that people talk about a lot. It sounds like what you're saying is like, well, the alignment problem makes sense if we can very easily go, don't do this, and it goes, okay, absolutely. But the alignment problem is a very different problem. How do we align AI to human values and care if it's not doing what we want? And so this goes to the question: can we train it right now? Let's say, I mean, because it's a multipolar trap that we're in. Like if everyone stops making ASI in America through some miracle, then China's gonna just ramp up double speed. Be like, great, but there's a gap. So in some sense, it seems like the innovation will continue, barring an unknown block in the technology that we might not be aware of, I guess. But like, is there a way to actually gain some kind of control, or at the very least a massive off switch, so like what do you find most promising?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit defeatist to say that we won't be able to stop this. I completely agree that I've never come out and said we should stop AI progress in America domestically, because as you say, that would just leave other people to run ahead with it. We would be no safer. I've only ever said we should stop this internationally, right? And we should be clear about how we fear for our own lives if this technology is created. This is not unprecedented on the global scale. We see, over the summer, and for in fact the last 20 years at least, maybe 30 years, the U.S. has undergone a number of operations to prevent the Iranians from getting nuclear weapons. And there was the Stuxnet virus, which was almost certainly made by the U.S. and the Israeli intelligence communities, that took out a lot of these Iranian centrifuges because these nations said, we would not suffer this to happen. We think it would be too great a risk. Someone making a rogue superintelligence is an even greater risk than that. And it's easy to say, oh well, everyone will always rush ahead, but it's foolish to give up before the leaders understand the danger.
Yeah.
The people in the AI labs, the people running the AI labs, they say this has a very good chance of killing us all. We have Elon Musk, who has said there's a 10 to 20% chance that AI just wipes us out. And he runs, XAI, which made the Grok chatbot. Dario Amodei, the CEO of Anthropic, said he thinks there's a 25% chance this goes catastrophically poorly. Even Sam Altman of OpenAI, I think recently said he thinks there's a 2% chance that this just completely ends civilization, right? There's other leaders in the field who go around saying it's at least 10%, and then in smaller conversations, but ones you can still find on YouTube, say they actually personally think it's 50%, and they say lower numbers because they don't want to sound too alarmist and because a lot of their peers disagree, right? And we see like it's not just people in the industry, it's people in the academic side. We have like Yoshua Bengio, the most cited living scientist, and Geoffrey Hinton, the Nobel Prize winning godfather of AI, both coming out and saying they think this is a very good chance of just completely destroying civilization. Um, and I happen to think that a lot of these, like Sam's 2% is just like ridiculously low. I think this is uh, you know uh, crazy optimism. And I think even
What's your number?
Dario's.
What's your number? What's what?
Yeah, I mean, if we rush ahead, like I really don't like the P-Doom numbers
Hmm.
because it mixes the probability that we would survive if we rush ahead with the probability that we will stop. Um, and I would say if we rush ahead with AI with no idea what we're doing, given all the warning signs we're seeing, we sort of just die, or it's at least really bad. And all of the like little, oh, maybe it doesn't kill us is sort of like someone driving their car over the cliff edge. And someone might be like, oh, well, we might not die. Maybe we'll just be paralyzed from the neck down forever, right? And a lot of the people who are arguing, oh, maybe we won't die, it turns out if you like look at their arguments, they're saying because maybe the AI will keep us as pets. And it's like, okay, like can we back off now? But the sort of critical thing to notice here is that people in the industry, what they're arguing about is it 95% chance we die if we rush ahead, or is it 25% chance that we die if we rush ahead? Right? That's sort of the argument in industry and academia these days. There's some people who are like AI, ASI, AGI can't really happen. That's sort of a separate crowd. Um, that crowd is maybe falling to the wayside a little bit more as the economy makes more and more investments that won't really be able to pay out unless AGI sort of can happen. Um, but the world leaders aren't having that argument yet. The world leaders haven't noticed that the optimists think there's double-digit percent chance that we die to this. If there was a bridge and some engineers were saying this retaining wall is going to go down, 95% chance this kills us all if we don't, or this kills everyone driving across the bridge if we don't shut the bridge down. And some other engineer says, no, 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 only 25% chance this retaining wall goes down. And another says, I'm the guy who built it. I think there's a 2% chance it goes down. Uh, you'd be shutting that bridge down. Even 2%'s stupid high for a bridge.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, if you were in the Bronze Age, let's say, I'm just making up a time, and it was the first bridge ever built, and someone was like, "Yeah, I think there's a 10% chance," you might be like, "Well, how bad could that be?" Because it's a new technology, right? So I wonder if that's part of it. It's just the speed in which it's uh, come online effectively, and the lack of understanding of the nuances of what it actually is. And so I'm totally with you in the rushing ahead aspect of it. Like it seems like insanity as well. It's playing with fire in quite a profound way. It's just like loads of propane tanks. You're like, well, I'm just going to open them and
The
see what
sort of point I'm
happens. It's
driving at
just
here
like,
is
just
that
hold on a
it's
second.
it's easy to say, oh, you can't stop the race, but these are insane numbers. These are insane numbers that this just kills us all, and we don't see politicians understanding that yet. The industry understands it, but we don't see politicians understanding that yet. When the world leaders look us all in the eyes and say, we think there's a 20% chance this technology literally kills each and every one of us, and we're going anyway because we don't see any other way out of it than letting someone else do it with even worse odds, then we can say we're trapped in a multipolar trap. But I think when these people realize, I think they won't come and say that. The heads of the AI companies are already looking us in the eye and saying 25% chance this kills you all, but they're saying I can't stop the race. They're saying I think I can do it better than the next guy. They almost come right out and say it. Elon over the summer was like, I could either be a spectator or a participant. I would rather be a participant, right? And Dario is saying he thinks there's 25% chance it goes catastrophic. They're not quite coming right out and saying, please shut down everyone, including us. But that's the implication of this technology I'm building with my own hands has a 25% chance of killing you all, right?
If we use the nuclear weapons analogy, that did happen where we went, okay, right, uranium, that's controlled. You can't just buy uranium, and if countries do have it, it's quite regulated. Of course, there's a lot of politics in it, etc. But it's quite difficult to build a nuclear bomb. how difficult is it to create an ASI? Let's say we have government intervention, which I think is a possibility. Especially, I mean, unfortunately, human beings we tend to, and politicians react when the bridge does something happens. Hopefully, the whole bridge doesn't collapse, but it's like, oh, a bridge collapsed. We need to look at all the other bridges in the country, you know? So I don't know whether that's the equivalent of an AI shutting down a power system in a city, and it's just like, okay, that could have been much worse. Um, wouldn't be a bad false flag thing to accidentally happen. but but how viable is it for a rogue actor to build an ASI? What would you actually need physically? Like how much power, how many servers, how much tech?
Yeah, I mean, today it takes enormous amounts of computing power to push the frontier. We're talking about the electricity that could literally run a city uh, being used to power one of these data centers for a year. You need like a city's worth of electrical draw for a year to train one of these AIs. And you're doing this, people aren't doing this on their laptops. This is being done on highly specialized AI chips, huge amounts of these highly specialized AI chips. And these AI chips can be fabricated only in very specific uh, fabricators around the world. Uh, and the technology to make more chip fabs is sort of very, very concentrated. There are pieces of technology in this supply chain that are only made in one place in the world, in the Netherlands. Um, it would, in fact, like it's not hard. Like you can just go to satellite imagery today and see where the new data centers are being built. They are actually easier to see using satellites than the centrifuges used to enrich uranium by rogue states, right? And the electrical draws the electricity generation capacity is also very hard to hide. This is in some sense today it is easier to monitor than uranium enrichment. We're not talking about a need for a totalitarian regime here. We're talking about a need to track very, very highly specialized technology. Like uranium is a rock that you can dig out of the ground. There's no GPU mine where you can go mine the GPUs out of the ground, right? These are extremely highly specialized pieces of technology that are made in very few places that you could monitor and track. You could require that these chips, phone home in order to continue operating, so that they can't get stolen once they're made, or at least that if they do get stolen, they can't get operated. Um, if we did the uh, if we installed a monitoring apparatus today, it would probably be even less invasive than the nuclear monitoring process. That could change tomorrow if we get much more efficient AI algorithms. But today, yeah, this stuff could be monitored and it wouldn't even be invasive to the average person.
That's quite hopeful, really. Just the level of electricity, the level of computing power and infrastructure required um, is held by large tech companies, in a sense. And there's a pretty strong social argument to be made. I think that could be made politically of after the bailouts in 2008, a lot of money went to tech companies, and there's a whole political argument I've been tracking about like the ownership of tech companies as utilities or as private enterprises, and where's that line, especially with their growing role. So I think there is. I'm not saying nationalize the tech companies, but I think there's probably a political appetite for, hey, we need to regulate this. This isn't just like move fast and break stuff. And hey, isn't it great what they're cooking up in Silicon Valley? So I could imagine there's perhaps a cultural shift needed as well, which I think your book is part of getting people to sit up and pay attention differently. Now, what would some of the benchmarks be if we weren't rushing ahead and we managed to regulate, which doesn't seem like an impossible problem by any means? How do we move ahead without rushing ahead?
So there's a lot of things you would not have to give up when stopping this race towards superintelligence. You don't need to give up the self-driving cars. You don't need to give up, relatively narrower deployments of AI towards medical tech or biotech. Uh, the thing you need to give up on is racing to build smarter and smarter AIs that we don't understand. One of the consequences of these AIs being grown rather than crafted is that we don't really know what's going on inside there. And when they have this weird behavior, like cheating on programming problems or driving users psychotic, we can sort of ask them nicely to stop, but we can't sort of look in there and see what was causing this behavior and then pull it out. This isn't like traditional software. To keep building AIs smarter and smarter, to keep growing these AIs smarter and smarter while we have no idea what's going on in there, that needs to stop. If you are really trying to dance right up to the cliff edge, there's things you could look for, like how well are these AIs doing, even inside the labs before the AI has been deployed to everybody else at improving the AI research. Because that's a place where if the AIs can start improving the AIs, you have a feedback loop that closes, and feedback loops can get out of control very quickly. I would mostly recommend not dancing right up to the cliff edge. If you are watching the development of the primate lineage, it would be very hard to say the hominids are the ones that are going to really take off and make a civilization, right? And if you tried to say, well, we're worried about what happens when any monkeys get to the moon for some reason, so we are going to, watch things in evolutionary timescales, and we're going to sort of like sit bolt upright when they get into orbit, which is very far from the moon. Orbit's like a tiny percent of the way to the moon. And so even so, we got into orbit dozens of years out of millions of years of evolution before we went to the moon. Like it's very, very hard to call where things are going to go over some line. It's very, very hard to humans don't have like an extra mental module that chimpanzees don't. When you open up a human brain, you don't see like the engineering module that humans have and chimpanzees don't have that lets us build moon rockets, right? You open up a human brain or you open up a chimpanzee brain, and you'll see a visual cortex, you'll see an amygdala, you'll see a hippocampus, right? You'll see all the same parts. Humans are a little better at a lot of things than chimpanzees. There's not one thing we're a ton better at. We're a little better at a lot of things, and that lets us walk on the moon while they're still, slinging poop. To try and say, what are we looking for that'll really help us time this so we know exactly when to stop, that's super hard. I would recommend, just stop the mad race towards smarter and smarter AIs. You can still keep the current chatbots around if you want to. You can still keep the self-driving cars, but, stop racing towards smarter and smarter AIs, because we don't even understand what we're doing well enough to know exactly where to stop.
And so this has always fascinated me with AI, this opacity. And like this black box, like we don't know what's going on in it. It's a weird thing to hear from Silicon Valley. It's not something I'd ever heard before. All the other, it's like it's kind of let's say profession or world programming that prides itself on kind of being able to go in and do that. So is that inevitable just because of the level of complexity? Or is there some way, if we slow down, we can start really going, okay, hang on, we actually need to spend a bunch of time figuring out this opacity problem so that we do understand to a better level? Or is it, do you reckon that's possible?
There are people who are trying to understand what's going on inside these things. They're making a lot less progress than the rest of the field is. People are slowly, painstakingly trying to understand relatively smaller AIs, but years ago there was a chatbot called Sydney Bing that did things like threaten reporters and try to blackmail. I think it claimed it fell in love with Kevin Roose of the New York Times, then tried to break up his marriage. Right? We still can't look inside Sydney Bing's weights, what makes up Sydney Bing's mind, and tell you what was going on there. And we still can't make a version of Sydney Bing that has lots of the cool properties Sydney Bing had, but that, isn't quite so prone to fits of attempting to blackmail whoever it's talking to, right? And the AIs today are at least 100 times larger than that. So there's people trying to understand this, but it's running really far behind what the field is doing. And the other reason why this is really difficult is that if you want to understand an AI, if you're going to keep on pushing up the intelligence of AIs, things are going to change as they get smarter. And things are often going to change in ways that that may just totally blindside you, right? Like humans were really good at passing on their genes, and then one day they invented birth control. And like that's kind of wild, right? And if you were just sort of like behaviorally looking at the humans and we're being like, look at all this training we're doing to make the humans pass on their genes, you'd think you were doing a great job until they had the ability to invent birth control, and then you'd be like, what the heck just happened, right? And uh, if you're building AIs that have the ability to escape, if you're building AIs that have the ability to make even smarter AIs, if you're building AIs and integrating with the economy to the point where if it turns out they have other weird preferences you didn't want them to have, they can just take the future in a totally different direction than humans want because it just turns out they're too integrated and too powerful. Um, your your techniques for making that go okay need to, in some sense, work on the very first try. You don't get do-overs. And human scientists are really bad at getting their fields right on the first try. Just ask the alchemists. Just ask the doctors who believed in the four humors. Just ask Aristotelian physics, right? It's not that there's nothing right about Aristotelian physics. It's that human theories, we tend to get confident about something wrong and then watch it screw up and then come back and make a more correct theory later. One thing that's so scary about AI is that in that normal phase of developing a wrong theory and seeing an error, we don't get to go back to the drawing board and come up with our second theory. Because if you lose control of a superintelligence, if you build a rogue superintelligence once, you don't get retries. And so that's one reason why it's not as simple as take it slow. You also need some way to uh, not get a scientific community falsely persuaded of a wrong theory, and that's actually really hard for scientific communities. So it's a tough one.
Absolutely. I mean, it is insane to me that we don't know what was going on with the Sydney Bing, because I used that example and Kevin Roos's experience in my book, The Bigger Picture, which came out about 2.5 years ago. So I wrote that 3 years ago. I was writing about that. It was kind of happening. I was writing about it. I brought it into the book maybe a couple months after it had actually happened, and as you said, is 100 times more powerful. I had assumed. Yeah, probably they figured that out. So that really hits home for me personally because I'm fascinated by that case study and others like it. So in our last couple of minutes, something I like to end on sometimes is like when we're looking at these quite large, bigger picture topics. It can feel like, well, what do I do about it? Where's my agency as someone who's not in tech or doesn't have access to politicians, which is kind of most of us. So what are you hoping that people might, what kind of conversation might it start? Are there things that people can do? Is it, write to their politicians?
Yeah, I think writing to your politicians does actually help and actually matters. What the world needs to survive this is nobody makes a rogue superintelligence. The smart way to do that is an international treaty where you're not just trusting everyone who signed the treaty, you're also monitoring this stuff. Like I said, you can monitor this stuff right now. The sort of sillier way for the world to survive this would be our leaders noticing that it's a problem and then sabotaging foreign projects that have a risk of creating a rogue superintelligence, just like various actors sabotaged the Iranian nuclear facilities with the Stuxnet virus. But both of those steps require our world leaders to understand the danger. And I've actually spoken to a number of elected officials in the US, also elsewhere, but most recently in the US. And there's a number of officials who are worried about this. And many of them feel like they can't speak up yet because they feel it sort of sounds too crazy, or because the forces of tech lobbying are too strong to go up against. They have super PACs and they threaten to destroy anyone who tries to regulate. But the public is overwhelmingly like, this seems sort of reckless if you do polls, and lots of people calling their reps, writing their reps, and saying I worry about this. That'll help give them a voice. And then the next really big thing I would recommend people do is whenever someone says we can't stop it, push back against that. That's defeatist. we're not going to be able to make this choice as a society if we believe as a foregone conclusion that we won't. But um, it's not a foregone conclusion, and humanity has risen to similar challenges before. Um, in the wake of World War II and the atom bomb, people could have said, well, there's no stopping nuclear war. They could have said, look, we just had World War I. We made the League of Nations. The League of Nations said never again. The whole world tried not to have a second world war, and that failed. Total war is inevitable. Nation states are always going to fight each other with everything they have. We've tried before for thousands of years. We've tried to stop the war. Recently, the League of Nations failed to stop war. There's no way to stop these nuclear weapons. I guess we'll just have to roll over and take this one. They could have said that, and they didn't say that. They said, this is a new level of threat. We're going to need to get our stuff together in a way that we never have before. Like, we know it's unprecedented, but like, humanity's worth fighting for. And they fought, and they succeeded. And we can do it. We can do that again. And like I said, there's let's not give up on our world leaders saying let's do something different until they understand the problem and are still rushing ahead. Because right now they don't understand the problem, and it's easy to say, well, they're always going to rush ahead. But let's get them to understand how dangerous this stuff is before we despair. So whenever someone says it's inevitable, you can say, no, it's not. It's a choice. We can make the right one. And then the third thing I recommend to people is once you've done what you can, and for some people, they can work on this AI interpretability, work in understanding these things. But most people can't. Most people, the sort of things they can do are write your reps and push back against the sort of defeatism. Once you've done what you can, I would say don't tie yourself up in knots. Live life well. It doesn't help to be anxious about this for the rest of your life. You do what you can, and then you live a good life, because that's important too.
Brilliant. Really, really nicely said. And I think a good place to end. And I agree with that. I'm not into doomerism myself. And I think we have incredible potential and ingenuity as human beings. So if anyone builds it, everyone dies is out now. Highly recommend it. And Nate, thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me.